Welcome back to the Generational series. I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Close that other tab. Put the phone down. Because what I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes, it's going to completely change how you see yourself, how you see your generation, and why you are the way you are. You know that feeling when you hear a specific sound and your entire body just reacts before your brain even catches up. Waka, 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 waka. If your chest just did something, if a tiny smile crept onto your face, or you felt something shift in your stomach, you didn't just hear a sound, you just remembered who you are. That sound isn't just a game. That sound is your childhood. That sound is your culture. That sound is the beginning of something that the entire world still hasn't fully given Gen X credit for. And if you don't watch this video all the way to the end, you are going to miss the real reason why Gen X didn't just play video games. Gen X built the entire gaming world that every generation after them is living in right now. Let's go. Let me take you back to 1972. Nixon is in the White House. The Vietnam War is still happening. Bell-bottoms are a serious fashion choice. And somewhere in a bar in Sunnyvale, California, a machine starts beeping. 2 white lines, a square dot, back and forth, back and forth. Pong. That's it. That's literally it. 2 lines and a dot, and the people lost their minds. The machine at Andy Capp's Tavern broke down within 2 weeks of being installed. Not because it was broken, because it was so full of quarters it jammed itself. Now here's what you need to understand about timing. The kids who were born between 1965 and 1980, that's Gen X, they were between the ages of 0 and 7 when Pong dropped. They were the perfect age. Young enough to absorb it completely, old enough to actually play it. They didn't discover gaming as adults the way boomers tried to. They grew up with it. It grew with them. It was in their DNA from the jump. And you have to ask yourself, what does it do to a child's brain when the very first interactive entertainment they ever experience is a video game, not a book, not a board game, a screen that responds to your input? Stay with me, because this question is going to matter a lot before this video is over. Now, here's where it gets real interesting. Picture this. It's 1978. Your mom drops you off at the mall. You've got $5 in your pocket, which in 1978 feels like being a millionaire. You walk past the Sears. You walk past the Spencers. You walk past the Orange Julius. And then you hear it, the noise, that beautiful, overwhelming, completely chaotic wall of sound coming from the back of the mall. Beeping, blasting, music, kids yelling. You walk in and the darkness hits you first. Then the neon. Then the rows and rows of arcade cabinets stretching back further than you can see. Chuck E. Cheese, Aladdin's Castle, these were not just game rooms. Do not let anyone tell you these were just game rooms. These were the first social networks Gen X ever had. No algorithm, no feed, no followers. Just real kids in real time, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching each other play, trash-talking, making friends, falling in love for the first time in front of a Galaga machine. The kid with the highest score at Centipede, that was the influencer, the person who could finish a game without losing a life. They had the whole crowd behind them, 3 people deep. Your social status, your reputation, your clout. It all lived in that arcade, and nobody had to log in. Nobody had to create a profile. You just had to show up and be good. Let me talk about the economy for a second, because this is something that shaped Gen X in ways that people seriously underestimate. $5, that's what you had on a Saturday afternoon. Now, in today's money, $5 in 1978 is roughly $23. But here's the thing, it wasn't just the amount. It was the decision-making process behind every single quarter. Do I spend it on Pac-Man and try to beat my old score? Do I try Space Invaders because the line is shorter? Do I save 2 quarters for Donkey Kong and spend the first 3 on asteroids? Do I lend a quarter to my friend and hope he pays me back, even though he never does? Gen X learned resource management, risk assessment, opportunity cost, and social economics at 9 years old, in an arcade, with quarters, and nobody taught them. They just figured it out, because the game didn't care about your feelings. The game took your quarter and asked, "What are you going to do about it?" Sound familiar? Because that's basically the Gen X life philosophy right there. Here is something that nobody talks about enough. That moment, that legendary moment, when you beat the high score, the screen flashes, the music plays, and the machine asks you, very politely, very seriously, for 3 letters. 3 letters to tell the world who you are. ASS. Okay, yeah, of kids typed that, but the point stands. Those 3 initials at the top of that leaderboard, that was your verified badge. That was your blue check mark. That was your viral moment. Except it wasn't digital. It was physical. Anyone who walked into that arcade, anyone who put a quarter in that machine, was going to see your name at the top. And it lasted until someone else beat it. Which meant you had to come back. Which meant you had to get better. Which meant failure wasn't the end. It was just the setup for the next attempt. High-score culture didn't just entertain Gen X. It wired them for competition, for resilience, for showing up repeatedly and trying again after you lose. In 2026, therapists charge $200 an hour to teach adults those skills. Gen X got it for a quarter. And then there were the parents. You're wasting your time. Turn that thing off. It's rotting your brain. Go outside and play. When I was your age. Sound familiar? Because every single Gen X kid in America heard some version of this speech from a boomer parent who genuinely, absolutely, completely did not understand what their child was experiencing. And here's the dark irony, and this is going to sting a little. The kids who were told video games were rotting their brains. Those kids grew up and built a gaming industry worth over $227 billion in 2024, an industry bigger than movies and music combined. So how's that for a waste of time? Okay, we need to talk about the machine that brought the arcade home, the Atari 2600, wood paneling on the front, a single joystick with 1 button, cartridges that looked like small rectangular bricks, and a TV connection that required more technical setup than most people's home theater systems do today. And it was magical. You have to understand what this moment meant for a Gen X kid. Before the Atari 2600, video games were somewhere you had to go. You had to get a ride. You needed quarters. You needed permission. Now, the game was in your house. Your living room became the arcade. Your couch became the machine. You didn't need $5. You just needed to get through dinner fast enough to claim the TV before your sibling did. The Atari 2600 didn't just change where Gen X played games. It changed the relationship between games and daily life. Suddenly, gaming wasn't a special occasion. It was just Tuesday. Now here's a chapter that most people skip over, but it's one of the most important parts of understanding Gen X's relationship with gaming. The industry collapses. Retailers stop carrying video games. Stores dump cartridges into bargain bins for 50 cents. Atari buries millions of unsold ET cartridges in a New Mexico landfill. And yes, that's a real thing that actually happened. Analysts declare that home video games are a dead fad. Just a trend, they said, like the hula hoop. And Gen X kids just kept playing. They didn't need the industry to validate them. They didn't need the market to survive for them to know that what they had experienced was real. They had already fallen in love. A market crash couldn't undo that. This is actually a deeply important psychological trait of Gen X that shows up over and over again in their lives. When institutions fail, when systems collapse, they don't fall apart. They adapt. They keep going. They find another way. The crash of 1983 didn't kill gaming. It filtered out the cheap, cynical money grabbers and left behind the people who actually cared. And it left behind Gen X, waiting for the next chapter. Then, October 18th, 1985, Nintendo Entertainment System hits the United States, and everything changes again. The graphics aren't just better. They're a different world. The games aren't just harder. They have stories, characters, worlds. Mario doesn't just jump over pipes anymore. He rescues princesses through entire kingdoms. Link explores dungeons and solves puzzles. Samus Aran blasts through alien planets. This wasn't just a new console. This was the birth of gaming as a narrative art form. And Gen X was right there at the beginning of it, old enough to appreciate it, young enough to be completely consumed by it. Toys R Us, Kmart, KB Toys. Those names hit different if you're Gen X, because you remember standing in those stores, staring at the locked glass cases with the NES cartridges behind them. You remember the weight of that cardboard box in your hands on Christmas morning. You remember the feeling of an era beginning. We need to have a moment of silence, a real moment, for the most effective and scientifically inexplicable tech support solution in human history. The cartridge wasn't loading. The game wouldn't start. The screen was just a blinking gray. Nothing. So you pulled the cartridge out. You blew into the bottom of it. You blew into the console slot. You put it back in. You pushed down on it. You wiggled it slightly. And it worked. It always worked. To this day, nobody, not engineers, not technicians, not the actual people who designed the NES, can fully explain why this worked consistently. It might have been the warm air. It might have been a placebo effect that somehow reset the electrical connection. It might have been pure generational magic. But here's what I love about this. Gen X didn't wait for a patch, didn't Google a fix, didn't call customer service, didn't return the product. They used what they had. Their breath, their intuition, their stubborn refusal to quit. And they fixed it themselves. And then they shared that knowledge. Every Gen X kid in America knew about the blowing trick. It spread person to person, kid to kid, entirely by word of mouth. That's not just nostalgia. That's a community solving problems together without any infrastructure. Duck Hunt. 2 words that Gen X has a complicated emotional relationship with. You had the orange zapper. You aimed it at the screen. You shot the duck. And that dog. That laughing dog. If you didn't immediately try to shoot the dog every single time he laughed at you, I don't believe you had a real childhood. But here's the real social psychology of the NES era that nobody talks about. The Player One negotiation. There was one controller. There was one TV. There were multiple siblings. And the question of who got Player One was not just a question of fairness. It was a question of power, of dominance, of family hierarchy. The argument started before anyone even turned on the console. The strategy was deployed before school let out. You had to position yourself psychologically, physically, and diplomatically to ensure that when your family sat down in front of that television, the cord to Player One was already in your hands. Gen X didn't learn sibling negotiation skills from therapy books. They learned them fighting for Player One. Let me paint you a picture of what it meant to be stuck. It's 1988. You've been playing The Legend of Zelda for 3 weeks. You are completely, hopelessly, totally stuck. You cannot figure out how to get into level 7. You've tried everything. You've wandered the entire map 4 times. You cannot Google it. Google doesn't exist. You cannot watch a YouTube walkthrough. YouTube is still 12 years away from existing. You cannot ask Reddit. Reddit is 16 years away from existing. You have 2 options. 1. Figure it out yourself. Sit down, map it on graph paper, think systematically, and refuse to give up until you solve it. 2. Wait for the next issue of Nintendo Power to arrive in your mailbox. Nintendo Power. 8.5 by 11 inches of pure salvation. Maps, tips, walkthroughs, secret codes, letters from other kids who were just as stuck as you. That magazine was not just a publication. It was a lifeline. It was a community. It was proof that you weren't alone, that somewhere out there, other kids were also losing their minds trying to find the second dungeon in Zelda, and some of them had figured it out. Gen X learned patience, problem-solving, and communal knowledge-sharing through a monthly magazine with a dog-eared corner and chocolate fingerprints on every page. This is the part of the video where I need you to really hear me. Gen X played games with no safety net, no autosave, no online hints, no tutorial mode with a little glowing arrow pointing you toward the objective, no difficulty settings, no mercy. You died in Mega Man, you went back to the beginning of the stage. You died in Ghosts and Goblins, you went back to the beginning of the game. You spent 3 hours on a single section of Battletoads, finally got through it, and then the game pulled something even harder immediately after. And you didn't quit. You didn't uninstall. You didn't leave a 1-star review. You didn't post on social media about how unfair it was. You sat down. You tried again. You got further. You died again. You tried again. This is not just nostalgia. This is literally the formation of a psychological identity. Gen X learned persistence, frustration tolerance, delayed gratification, and the deeply human skill of continuing after failure. From video games. In a world that gave them very little, games at least gave them this: the guarantee that if you kept trying, you would eventually get better. For the generations watching this who don't know what a password notebook is, sit down. Before save files existed, games gave you passwords, long strings of seemingly random letters and numbers that, when entered correctly, would take you back to where you were. These passwords were not short. These passwords were not simple. R, Y, S, K, H, M, K, F, B, V, Z, L, Q, P, T, J. And if you wrote one letter wrong, one single letter, you got a corrupted file screen and had to start from scratch. Gen X carried password notebooks the way executives carry briefcases. Those little spiral notebooks with game passwords written in careful, deliberate handwriting were more valuable than school notebooks. They were handled with more care than library books. They were hidden from siblings like classified documents. You knew exactly which notebook had the Metroid passwords. You knew exactly which page had the code for Ninja Gaiden Level 4. You treated that information like treasure because it was treasure. Gen X learned meticulous record-keeping, the value of written information, and the devastating consequences of carelessness from a notebook full of video game passwords. Summer break for Gen X had a mission. It wasn't passive. It wasn't just relax and have fun. Summer was a project. The project was beat the game, not finish a world, not reach a certain level. Beat the game, get to the final boss, see the ending screen, experience the victory that you earned through weeks of concentrated effort. The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros. 3, Contra, Castlevania. These weren't games you casually played. These were campaigns, multi-week, multi-month endeavors that required planning, dedication, and the willingness to lose everything and start over if you had to. And there was no certification at the end, no trophy that posted to your social media, no achievement notification. Just you, alone in your living room or your best friend's basement, watching the credits roll on a 13-inch television with a broken color knob, and knowing, absolutely knowing in your bones that you did something real. That feeling? That quiet, private, earned satisfaction. That's a Gen X superpower, and it was built in a basement with a Nintendo controller in 1989. Real quick, because this one needs to be said. Multiplayer gaming in 2026 means putting on a headset and talking to someone in Norway. Multiplayer gaming in 1987 meant sitting so close to another human being that you were sharing body heat, arguing over who got the better joystick, and getting physically pushed off the couch when someone got too excited about a combo. Gen X multiplayer was contact sport. It was three kids jammed onto a love seat meant for two. It was someone's sweaty arm against your sweaty arm. It was genuine screaming. It was real stakes. When you beat your friend at Street Fighter in person, you felt it. When you lost, you felt that. The joy and the pain were all real, all physical, all immediate. You couldn't mute someone. You couldn't block them. You couldn't leave the lobby. You were in the room. You had to figure it out. Gen X learned conflict resolution, social boundaries, and genuine competition through sitting 6 inches away from their best friend and absolutely roasting them for 30 straight minutes. Here's the thing about Gen X and losing. The cartridge glitched and deleted your save. The power went out mid-boss fight. Your brother tripped over the power cord right before the final stage. The game literally froze on the last level. Gen X didn't rage quit. The game quit on them. Constantly, without warning, without apology, and they came back the next day and started over. That's not just resilience. That's something deeper. That's a fundamental belief that the effort was worth it regardless of the outcome. That playing was the point, not just winning. In a world that talks a lot about mental toughness and grit, Gen X figured that out in the 3rd grade because they had no other choice. Look, I'm going to say this with respect because this isn't about competition. Every generation has its gifts. But I need to be honest with you. Gen Z grew up with graphics so realistic they look like film footage, environments so detailed you can see individual blades of grass, characters with facial expressions, voice acting, motion capture. Gen X grew up with 8 pixels and a beep, and those 8 pixels somehow contained entire worlds. Because when the game can't show you everything, when the graphics are limited, when the screen is small, when the sound is just a series of beeps, your imagination has to do the heavy lifting. Your brain fills in the gaps. You're not watching a world, you're creating one. That Zelda dungeon wasn't just a series of gray corridors on a screen. In a Gen X kid's mind, it was a labyrinth. It was dark. It was dangerous. The music made it feel real. Gen Z has virtual reality. Gen X had mental reality. Both are incredible, but only one of them built the foundational neural architecture for creative immersion from scratch. Quick math, real quick. In 1980, one life cost you 1 quarter, 25 cents. For that quarter, you got a chance, one shot to prove yourself, one opportunity to get further than you did last time. In 2026, a battle pass costs $70, and you still might not get the cosmetic item you actually wanted. And by the time you finish the season pass, they've already released the next one. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I am saying this. There is something profound about a system where the cost of entry was a single quarter and the reward was a high score with your 3 initials on it. Nobody was selling Gen X their own nostalgia back to them. Nobody was creating artificial scarcity around digital items they'd never physically hold. The game was the game. You paid your quarter. You played. You either made it or you didn't. And when the quarter was gone, when your $5 was spent on a Saturday afternoon, you walked out into the sunlight and you felt like you'd lived something. Here is the last comparison I want to make, and then I'm going to leave this one alone. Gen X watched video games get born. They were there for the first frame, the first pixel, the first time a screen responded to human input as entertainment. They lived through Pong becoming Pac-Man, becoming Donkey Kong, becoming Super Mario, becoming Zelda, becoming Final Fantasy. They watched every single technological leap happen in real time. They felt every jump forward as a physical experience. Today, millions of people watch other people play video games on streaming platforms. They watch instead of play. They experience gaming secondhand, mediated through someone else's reaction. Again, not a criticism. There's real value in gaming content. But there is something unique, something genuinely irreplaceable about being the generation that was present at the creation. Gen X didn't watch someone else experience Pong for the first time. They experienced it themselves. The label Generation X was actually meant as a slight. It came from the idea of an undefined generation, an hex, an unknown variable, a question mark, the generation that didn't fit neatly into any category. And in that ambiguity, there's actually a profound truth. Gen X experienced everything first. They were the X factor, the unknown variable, the generation that no one fully understood because no one had a roadmap for what they were going through. Nobody had grown up with arcade games before. Nobody had brought video games into their living rooms before. Nobody had navigated the transition from analog to digital entertainment before. Nobody had been the first generation of gamers before. Gen X had no template, no guide, no what to expect when you're a gamer. They figured it out in real time, with no instructions, no saves, and no guaranteed ending. Sound like anyone you know? Let me be very clear about so we come to the close of this video. Gen X didn't just consume gaming culture, they built it. The vocabulary, the rituals, the community, the unwritten rules, the etiquette of the arcade, the culture of the high score, the sacred art of the password notebook, the social contract of Player One, the patience of waiting for Nintendo Power, the philosophy of trying again after you fail. All of that, every single piece of it, was created by Gen X in real time with no instruction, out of pure necessity and genuine love. And that culture didn't stay in the 1980s. It became the foundation for every gaming community that came after it. The millennials who lined up at midnight for PlayStation, the Gen Z streamers with millions of followers, the esports athletes competing for million-dollar prize pools. Every single one of them is standing on ground that Gen X built, quarter by quarter, cartridge by cartridge, password by password. I want to speak directly to every Gen X person watching this right now. You are in your 40s and 50s in 2026. The world is moving faster than ever. Technology changes every 6 months. The culture keeps telling you you're out of touch, that your references are too old, that your era is over. I want you to hear this clearly. Your era is never over. Because your era wasn't defined by technology. It was defined by character. You are the people who learned to lose and try again before you were 10 years old. You are the people who built community without an app. You are the people who found joy in 8 pixels and a beep. You are the people who got knocked down by a market crash, a power outage, and a laughing duck and came back to play again. You didn't just play the first level of gaming history. You played all the way through. And the culture, the industry, the vocabulary, the entire world of interactive entertainment that exists in 2026, all $227 billion of it, started with you in a dark room with a quarter, standing in front of a glowing screen, ready to play. Game over? Gen X? Not a chance. If this video hit you somewhere real, if you felt something watching this, if a memory came back that you hadn't thought about in years, that's exactly why this series exists. Because generational psychology isn't just about statistics and timelines. It's about understanding why you are the way you are, why you think the way you think, why you handle things the way you handle them. And we're just getting started. This is episode 6 of the Generational series. We've still got episodes coming that are going to hit just as hard as this one, covering every generation, every defining moment, every cultural earthquake that made each generation exactly who they are. So if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, because I promise you do not want to miss the next one. If this video resonated with you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think about someone you know, if you want more people to understand what X actually went through, share this video, drop it in a group chat, send it to someone who needs to see it. And in the comments right now, I want to know, what was your game? What was the first video game that made you feel like the whole world could be contained inside a screen? Tell me down below. I read every single one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And to the first generation of gamers, this one was for you. See you in episode 7.